Hey, everybody, this is Jacob Stoops, and we are back. Episode 52. This is our first interview of the season, and of course, I am your host. And we are joined by my co-host, Mr. Jeff Luella. Jeff, say hi to everybody.
Hey, howdy, hey.
Jeff, you made it back for another episode.
I
I
did.
was a little worried about you all week. I was literally using probably 3 to 4 different technologies just to check on Jeff because he was slammed.
Yeah, and some of it I brought onto myself. I've started nerding out on some coding project, and it's been a little while, and was spending like 2 a.m. time to get it done, and then waking up for work, and so
Wow.
things. Yeah, I got a little tired there. But the good news is that my wife took the kids on vacation this weekend, so it's just me and code time for 3 days.
Party time sounds
It's
like.
it's what happens when you party in your 40s.
Right. Oh, sounds a little boring. Sorry, Jeff. That's
Yes,
that's really
totally is
boring.
boring.
Is that sad?
It's the most boring thing ever, but I'm so excited for it.
So we have a very special guest today. We have got Mr. Joe Hall of Hall Analysis on. How's it going, Joe?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we are super excited. Interviews have been at the core of this podcast since season one, and we are really excited to dive into your story and figure out who is Joe Hall, where did you come from, and to talk SEO. Really excited.
Yeah. How'd you become the
Awesome.
honey badger?
The honey badger.
Yeah,
The
the honey
SEO honey
badger.
badger.
Or
Yeah.
a pirate or a boiled peanut aficionado. I'm
Well,
definitely interested in
the
both.
I got started when I got started in SEO. I didn't I didn't want to be like all of the other SEOs out there that went around and said, I'm an SEO guru, or like I'm an SEO master ninja expert. And so being conscious of like personal branding, I figured, well, I'll just talk about what I like to do, and I do SEO, and let
Yeah.
other things kind of sell my expertise, but not go around telling people you're an expert.
do,
Um,
do, do you guys find that you become a little more suspicious of somebody when they utilize the word expert, guru, ninja, any of those like weird adjectives to describe their SEO capabilities?
yeah, I do, but at the same time, I have like a mixed feeling about it because here's the thing, and this is something that maybe we're jumping ahead a little too far, but when I first got involved in SEO, and like to be clear, I'm not a normal SEO because I'm like someone that uh, is conscious of personal branding, and I'm actually like wanting to build a personal brand because I'm a solo entrepreneur. Plenty of SEOs don't do that, and plenty of SEOs probably find me obnoxious, and I totally understand and appreciate that. Uh, but I will say that when I first got started in SEO, I had like all of these thoughts about personal branding, like you're mentioning, like the guys that go out and talk about how they're an expert and everything, and how obnoxious that is. But to be honest, in the last couple of years, I've been experimenting a little bit with being more obnoxious, and I've noticed that it actually works. Like, and when I do things that I used to like turn my nose up at when I first got started, like bragging about stuff or whatever, um, I'm getting more response out of that. Like I'm actually getting more leads, and I'm generating more business, doing things that I used to think was kind of tacky. Um, and so yeah, it's weird. Like generally speaking, I'm not into that as a professional, but apparently people that are buying SEO services or consulting, it that resonates with them, and like that kind of stuff kind of works in some ways. So I don't know. It's weird kind of thing for me to witness, but yeah, I have mixed feelings about that whole thing.
Yeah, there was an SEO agency. I'm from Philadelphia, but live in Atlanta now. But there was an SEO agency right outside of Philadelphia called One SEO.
Uh huh.
And the CEO there, at least on my drive down I-95 from the suburbs into Philadelphia, no lie, at least 10 billboards with the CEO with his arms crossed, and it's
Yeah.
like guaranteed first page rankings on it. And as an SEO, it made me cringe so bad.
Yeah.
But at the other end of that is like he has 10 billboards about this, and they were always there. Like he'd switch them out with different sayings and things like that. So obviously, like being at that level of obnoxious, like is working for him. Though I have a personal vendetta, but it's I
Yeah.
just think it's one of those where like if I get someone who links to me and says that they're a ninja or something like that, I take it tongue in cheek, and I do look at the credentials at that point and go like, okay, well, you've been doing SEO for 2 years, you're not a ninja yet.
Yeah.
So.
The funny thing, Jeff, as you were talking, especially because we're in presidential season, all I kept thinking of was like, if Trump were an SEO, nobody knows Google better than me. I am the
totally
best
this guy.
SEO out there.
Yeah.
So on their site's blog, he has an article about how he's the Tom Brady of SEO. So totally.
Oh my God. Yeah. I was just picturing if Trump were an SEO, the types of things he would say. And that's because I just watched the debate. What was it, last night?
Yeah.
Complete. From what I understand, I don't want to get political, but I watched it for about an hour, and it was just a giant shit show the entire time. And I didn't watch the first one, and I heard that was worse, and I was like, how can it get much worse?
And there's something that I like a lot is that a lot of things that are missed about the debates is that it doesn't matter who the candidates are either.
Exactly.
Like in the last couple of years, the last couple election cycles, the debates have been pointless. They've been meaningless. And I think it's really about fundraising. It's just a fundraising prop because folks that donate money like to watch the debates, and then they get riled up, and then they donate more money. So it's just it's a content marketing thing. So it is what it is. But yeah.
If you ask me, the real heroes of the debates are the moderators.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I heard, or not heard, I read a tweet from Search Discovery's very own Tim Wilson, analytics guru. And the tweet read something like, my old response to the job I would most never want, the default answer was kindergarten teacher. And last night, I think I changed that to debate moderator.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's back it up. A lot of times when we do interviews, we get right down in the weeds, and then we have to back up a little bit.
Okay.
So Joe, take us back. Tell us about you. Who are you, and how did you get into SEO?
So my name is Joe Hall. I'm an SEO, obviously, but I also kind of think of myself as a web developer, and because of that, I'm a technical SEO. I got started in this whole thing on accident. I think that's true for everybody or most people. So what happened was, and this goes back a long time. In the '90s, I was a teenager, and I was building websites. And they were, real shitty websites. But it was, on HTML, purely HTML, GeoCities kind of Angel Fire approach websites. And I had a friend then who was more business minded, entrepreneur minded, and he wanted to make money with the websites. I didn't really give a shit about that, but oh, by the way, am I allowed to curse on this show?
You just did.
Yeah, I know I did. I wanted to clarify before.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I mean, let's not. I think we're in the things you can say on. I think there are certain curse words that we say pretty regularly. I think there's other curse words that we kind of leave out.
There's a switch and a dial inside my head, and I can easily turn it, but I want to make sure if I need to or not. But anyways, I never really did it as a businessman, but I was really good at computers back then. but didn't really know. I had no relative, like nothing to compare what I was doing to. Um, and then when I went into college, I have uh, I use a wheelchair, and I have a disability. And so when I was going into college, several people in my life then, I was like still a teenager, said to me things like, well, you should study computer science because you're in a wheelchair, and that would be an obvious thing that you could do, when you're in a wheelchair. And that is like the worst advice to give any young person with a disability is to like, you should do this because you have a disability. And you obviously can't tell a teenager what to do. I kind of rebelled against that a little bit and went and studied political science instead, and which was a really great education and very eye opening. And I got to meet a lot of people and experience a lot of things. But as far as career wise, it was kind of a waste of time, because when I got out of college, I found it extremely difficult to get a job with a political science degree, even though I was like incredibly involved during my time in college. I was just like super involved in things, but none of that really mattered. And so what I was doing though, while I was in college and after, I was volunteering with a lot of political organizations, nonprofits, and ended up just making their websites because that was what I could do. And then eventually, a few years after college, I'm still doing that. I'm like, these people should be paying me. So I started a web development business then, where I focused on nonprofits and small businesses. And then eventually, many of those businesses started asking me about marketing stuff. And that seems to be a natural progression for a lot of web developers, web designers, that their clients start asking about marketing and specifically SEO because you can hire someone to do your ads, or you can hire someone to do your local citations, that kind of thing. But SEO, the fundamentals of it is kind of technical. So a lot of business owners turn to their web developer first about that. And so I started learning about SEO then, and kind of got into it then around 2007ish. Got into SEO professionally, um, and then by 2012, that was all I was doing. I was not doing any more web development by 2012. And then that same year, I went off to work for the Ninjas, Internet Marketing Ninjas, Jim Boykin's company up in Albany, New York. And I did that for, I think, 2 years. And then went back out on my own in 2014, and then worked for a little under a year at Proficient Digital. And that was around 2016, 17 maybe, or 17, 18. Um, yeah, worked for a little under a year there. But still, like between that 2014 till now, I maintained Hall Analysis. I didn't take any clients when I was at Proficient Digital, but Hall Analysis has been sort of my baby since 2014. And when you're a business owner, you go through different periods with your business, and right now I'm kind of uh, wanting to put more effort into it and build out some more foundational kind of things that will hopefully pay off long term. And so that's the process I'm in right now. But that's basically my history in a nutshell. And also, I guess I should mention this is sort of related, but not really. I did a lot of affiliate marketing too before I got into SEO. Because when I was building the websites with the web development business, I was also looking for other revenue streams, and affiliate marketing was something that I kind of experimented with. Was not super successful with any of that stuff, um, but it definitely taught me a lot about like promoting a website, and building a brand versus just a site. There's a difference between the two, and so I learned a lot about that then. But yeah, that's basically my experience in a nutshell.
It's nice. I'm doing affiliate marketing now.
Excuse me?
I'm doing affiliate marketing right now.
Okay, cool.
Well, it's interesting. I used to play with it in the past, and now I started working with the New York Times in their division called Wirecutter. As soon as I accepted that job, I had like 10 of my affiliate friends reach out and like,
hmm
hey, can you give me a link from there?
hmm
Because I've been instantly their competitor, so it's fun.
Yeah.
So, Joe, when you were a web developer,
hmm
what was the tipping point for you to stop being a web developer? And maybe you never stop, right? But to stop doing that as your means of getting paid and start, moving into full-time SEO.
So I was doing the web development for companies and nonprofits, and then when I started offering SEO services, I then decided to get involved in the SEO community, and started going to like SEO conferences and stuff like that. And then through doing that, a lot of SEOs that I met at the conferences would hire me for development work, and I started doing, and that's really where I tell people that I learned technical SEO was you know being a dev for other SEOs. And what I noticed with them was, and also with building the websites, was that you could make a lot more money as an SEO than a like freelance developer. Um, and also, in all honesty, admitting, in 2009, I was not a very good business person. So uh, I think my thought process was not about how do I grow a web development business. My thought process was just like, how do I make more money, like right now. And if I had the mindset I had now, I probably would have stuck with the web development business and done it in a different way and tried to grow that business versus just chasing like the next money, thing. But I don't have any regrets either. But I really went into SEO because it was like, well, these guys that I'm, writing code for are making like four times what I am, and in all honesty, are doing a hell of a lot less work, because a lot of my clients now were strategy people, um, like what I do now. And they weren't implementing any of the SEO, so it was like, well, gosh, I want to do this, and so that's kind of how I got into it. But it was still like maybe like 3 or 4 years until I quit doing development entirely. For money. I still do a lot of development now, and this new thing that I'm doing now, it requires a lot of development. I started a WordPress hosting company, um, and so that's not directly development for clients, but it requires a lot of development because I have to maintain a lot of client sites, or have to provide a lot of technical support, or we're building out a lot of stuff too with that company, where I'm going to be building some themes and plugins and that kind of stuff. So there's development work there too. But that was really the big change, was when I realized that, oh god, like SEOs are making more money than I am, and I can totally do that. And so I got into it that way. you know
Lisa, what's your favorite language to program in?
I'm gonna just take a risk here and just be honest and say PHP. And I say that because, like, always, I feel like a cranky old man all the time, though, because like I get like, all these folks nowadays they're all into like JavaScript frameworks, or they love Python or whatever. And I mean, no disrespect to anyone. Like, I think that all that's great, but um, I think PHP has gotten a bad name for itself. I think that it's still a very capable language, especially the most recent PHP versions. And we're already starting to see. I follow the WordPress core developers in Slack, and I mean they're already playing out for like PHP 8 now, and it's going to have a lot of improvements in that. So I think PHP is just a beautiful language. And like, there's a time and place for JavaScript, right? Like, absolutely. And there's a time and place for Python. But I just think that PHP is just where it's at. I'm a PHP fanboy, you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, WordPress has been based on PHP for years, and
Yeah.
WordPress makes up like 20 to 30% of the internet. So it can't be all bad, right?
Well, and there's that. There is the. I think that that's exactly the point. Is that the from a utilitarian standpoint, PHP is like the perfect utility because every lamp stack comes with it, right? So you're not with these JavaScript frameworks, you have to integrate that, into the stack afterwards. And then on top of that, like there's just a lot of problems with that. There's a lot of problems with client side scripting in general, Um, and people complain a lot about you know server speeds and stuff like that. But there are so many fixes now for that. There's so many options for caching, and there are so many content delivery networks now. I mean, you can fix all these things that are happening on the server side
Yep.
easily. So I'm a big fan of PHP. I could talk forever about this though, so I don't want to. I don't want to waste your time with my
No,
fanboying over
it's
PHP.
great. So when I started coding, I started coding in standard plain old ASP that was VB based.
Uh huh.
And I felt like when I started moving, like PHP was way more comfortable with a lot of stuff. So I think I did a lot of my coding in PHP too. And then I stopped coding for a while. And then like I started playing with like Google Sheets and like extensions, and they all use JavaScript.
Uh huh.
And so I've been moving more towards JavaScript, but not necessarily on the front end. I've been playing with a lot of Node.js and Puppeteer, so I can do some scraping and things like that. But things people probably would use Python for, but I just kind of understand JavaScript, so it's like why I start from the ground up learning something new.
Yeah.
When I feel like something like Node.js and being able to use that really kind of helps out.
Absolutely.
So it's funny as you guys are nerding out. I consider myself a technical SEO. I'm not by no means a developer, and I'm sitting here thinking I started in Dreamweaver. Anybody remember? Anybody remember that? So
Oh
I'm
yeah.
more of a front end designer, and I'm this show every episode. Whether it's me getting imposter syndrome because I'm listening to really smart people or people talking about it, hits on it at every time, and I'm sitting here going, I can't do any of that. But that it's totally okay because I still consider myself a good technical SEO, but you don't have to be a
Right.
full stack developer, which
You
it's just
don't.
funny.
You don't have to be a full stack developer
Yeah.
at all. You don't have to really even know any of the server side coding. But what I do think helps
Yep.
for technical SEOs is to have a basic understanding of how the
Mm-hmm.
stack works,
Yep.
and to understand the user path as it relates to loading a URL in the browser and how that URL turns into your favorite meme on Twitter. Because that understanding the complex nature of like, okay, I'm making a URL request, like, and in like a few short seconds, I'm gonna get like a SpongeBob meme. Like, how did that happen? And understanding how that happened in that process helps with the technical SEO kind of approach. Um,
Right. And how
yeah,
you get the Twitter whale.
yeah, exactly, and also how you get a fail wheel. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, both of those things are important to understanding like technical SEO to understand that whole relationship between the user onto the bottom of the server and then back to the user again. You know,
So Joe, tell us about some of your biggest SEO successes.
successes. Well, honestly, my biggest successes, I can't talk about because I'm under a non-disclosure agreement with them. And even if those non-disclosures may have expired by now, I don't want to talk about them because I would like to retain them as clients. I like them to come back to me. But I've had some pretty good successes. I've taken over like the top of rankings for some very competitive terms, terms that made clients, millions of dollars, um, and that kind of thing. Um, but at the same time, I've also seen some big failures as well. And You kind of have to balance that. That's the what happens with any career that you've been in for a while. You have ups and downs and highs and lows, and that just happens. But I've had some pretty big successes with SEO where we've taken companies that are failing. Like one company, for example, they were ranking number one um, for their target term, and they lost it. They went to page two, but that shift um, accounted for $500,000 in like 2 months. Um, and I looked at it and I was like, okay, we're gonna do this, this, and this. And they argued with me about it, but they did it, and they were back to number one again. Um, and from then on, I was like their savior. Um, and so things like that are fun to do. I had another client who he was. I guess I can tell this story. It's been so long ago. I had a client who was making um, pet urns. These are like urns for your pet if your pet dies. And he claimed to be the only manufacturer of pet urns within the United States, and everybody else was getting urns from China. Um, and he was actually making the urns. Like he actually had a production facility in California making these urns, and he was trying to compete against you know Amazon and like all these other places that were selling these like uh Pets Inc. and all that stuff. And I told him, I was like, look, and this is he did not really have a budget at all for SEO. And I asked him, I said, well, let me ask you about your business. Like, is this like you're a retail shop? Like, are you doing retail only? And he was like, oh, no, no, no. Like half of our business is wholesale. We sell to veterinarian clinics and crematoriums that would cremate animals. And I'm like, well, let's look into that market instead. And so we looked into that, and there was like nobody selling wholesale pet urns. So we set up a really like basic landing page for that, had him ranking, and his business grew 400% just by that kind of approach. So that was a really good win, and I was really happy about that for him. Um, so stuff like that happens. I wish I could talk about the really cool stuff though, because I'll tell you one really cool thing without naming names. So one time, this is before Google got really serious about link building, and actually it still kind of works, but I built a client a WordPress plugin that included a link in it in the plugin. Like the plugin basically was sort of like a short code, sort of that would basically add a widget onto a person's site, and then within that widget we had a code, a link basically to the client. The link was completely like legit. It was a utilitarian link. It was definitely there for good reasons. And that whole plugin generated like I want to say now probably about 12 million backlinks to the client. And they went from doing okay with their SEO to taking over like any keyword they wanted. Um, and the surprising thing is that whole thing continued to work without a problem even after Penguin. So I built it before Penguin, and
Wow.
it continued to work after Penguin.
That's great.
And the reason is because, and I learned a lot from that whole thing because I followed them. You know, when Penguin hit, I was like checking on them because I was like, "There's no way they're going to survive this," you know. But what I learned from that was that Google, and I think this is still true today, when it comes to backlinks, Google's algorithms and everything they do with backlinks is all based around like intent, like what is the intent of that backlink, and the backlinks within that widget, the intent was pure. I mean, it was really it helped the user. It was not something like, you know, we're trying to promote them or we're trying to do this or that. It literally was like a very pure backlink that provided value to the user after they clicked it. You know, and I think because of that, it stood the test of time. Now that kind of approach does not work anymore. The reason is because the plugin and review team at WordPress.org is savvy now, and they know what to look for, and they will either have you remove links outright. That's probably what they'll do, or they'll have you no follow them. In fact, I think they're more inclined to ask you to remove them because they're great people, but they don't understand the nuances of no follow and all the other ways to like block a link. So they're more interested in just removing it outright, you know. Um, and so that doesn't really work anymore, you know, with the WordPress at least. Um, yeah, but that was a big success for me, and I really enjoyed that. And they really loved it too. So that was cool, you know.
So you brought up an interesting point with your first success. So the client argued with you, and then they eventually did it, and it worked.
Yeah,
And I would say, in my experience on the agency side, implementation tends to be the number one problem, not quality of recommendations. It's
yeah,
speed and accuracy of implementation.
yeah.
So in that case, or in any case, how do you go about overcoming client objections to ultimately win them over to your side?
That's a really good question. So that in that specific case that I mentioned earlier, where they were giving me pushback on it, the reason they were giving me pushback on it is because up until that point, they were doing good with SEO, like, and they knew SEO. This was not a situation where SEO was a foreign concept to them. They understood SEO, and you could tell they understood it because they were ranking number one for that term. Um, but when I made that recommendation to them, it kind of went against their entire logic process to get ranking to that number one spot. Um, Essentially, what they were doing was that they over optimized that page. Basically, they had the keyword in too many places. They had uh, it was just over optimized. And so when I went in and basically de-optimized the page, and then also encouraged them to figure out better ways to internally link to that page, you know, that helped out considerably. And it's when you have a client that has already gone through the SEO process, and has already done their optimizations, convincing them then later that they did it wrong or that they need to make a change to this or that is difficult because they've already invested the time, they've already invested money into that process. And if you come in and tell them that no, you need to do this, this, and this, well, then it's your word against the last consultant, or
Yeah.
your word against the agency that they worked with, or it's your word against the vice president of the company that read a book once or something. You have to kind of like tackle that, and that's difficult. Every client's a little different though, and some clients, you've got like a mid-level marketing manager that totally understands what you're saying and wants to do everything that you have given them, but they have to work through a bureaucracy of people to implement what you've mentioned. And so what I do when I work with in-house people a lot of times is I make sure they understand that like I'm on their side, right? So So if they're having trouble getting something done internally with an audit or something like that, then they need to let me know like how I can help them get that done, how I can help them convince their managers, and how I can be of service to them that gets the best results. And in some cases, that comes down to like I need to do an extra layer of analysis to prove a point that's in the audit, or I need to give the audit to them in a certain way or a certain format that's easier for them to digest or understand. Or it's even like that I need to even like help them write out a JIRA ticket, that could explain this to their development team in a way that makes sense for them to do it. So there's all sorts of things that like you have to kind of work with the company on to get things implemented. I find it easier to get things implemented when I am working with like a lower level person and we can be kind of strategic. Probably one of my least favorite types of clients, and I shouldn't say this because I have a few right now and I hope they're not listening, but my few least favorite are the CEOs because it's like you can't argue with them, and there's no one above them to leverage this off of, or to get them to convince someone else. It's just them. And so and also they are kind of always used, even if they have the best intentions, they're used to like just getting their way. So you're kind of like, well, okay, I guess I'm not going to get that done. And it's problematic as well because they also have their own ideas a lot of times of what's going to work and what's not going to work, and then you are basically there either telling them, okay, that's going to waste your time, or that's not going to waste your time, or it's really not a great setup. But I guess my best advice is if you can become a partner with someone at the company and help them, let them know that like part of your consulting effort is to help them be successful internally at the company, and if you can do that, then you can get those SEO objectives met quicker.
Yeah,
I will. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was like, since I've moved to in-house, it's interesting from the agency side. I feel like it was always a battle to get in, to the developers' heads or even try to get into the process.
Yeah,
Since I've went in-house, like it's not easy. We're all on different teams, but it's at least there's one common goal, right, with inside the company where we're, and I have like a million at bats of like, hey, I joined all the engineers and developers Slack channels, and I commented on
yeah,
them, and I'm able to, if I was in the office, like you go over and hang out, and I usually, since I am more technical focused, those are the people I want to hang out with.
yeah,
But then on like when you're a developer and you hear about SEOs a lot of times, you're like, they're just gonna make me do title tags,
yeah,
like that. So building that trust and that like, hey, like I have knowledge in this too. Like I'm not gonna tell you how to code, but at the same time, like I'll give suggestions on like, hey, maybe we can use this framework or this, something there. But like you're totally in charge. So
I would
yeah,
say one of my least favorite probably one of the things that I'm worst at, would be speaking executive speak and having a good sense for what a CEO or a CMO wants or needs, or having patience for the way that they sometimes act. Because Joe, you're right, they are certainly used to getting their own way, and quite honestly, some of them are, frankly, they're intimidating, and they know it. And sometimes they, um, when they smell blood in the water, or they sense that you are in any way intimidated, it's just something about them that just goes right after that thing. And then there have been other times where the CEOs had the best of intentions, but and this is just my experience, but tended to be a little bit scatterbrained.
yeah,
So and sometimes they're a CEO because they're visionaries, they're creative,
mm-hmm,
which for me that's not necessarily my personality. I'm more structured, organized, regimented, processed. So I think it's just two different types of personalities, which for me is a struggle to figure out how can I say what I need to say or communicate in the way that I need to communicate to get them to do what I need them to do and what they ultimately need to be doing in order to achieve the success that they want. And if you've ever seen the movie Inception, where it's like, how can I make them think that the idea came from them? So part of SEO, I feel like, especially on the agency side, is figuring out psychologically, we know what they need to do. How can I frame it in a way that makes sense to them or makes it really easy for them to do the thing that they need to do or to get out of their own way in order to be successful?
That is so smart, and I think that's a really a good way to think of it. And I think that it's unfortunate that we have to do that because like I'm sitting here like when I do an audit for someone, like I have to think about, okay, how am I going to explain like the value of fixing these internal redirects, or anything like that, and or how am I going to explain the value of cutting out these redirect chains, and so I have to think about that. But then I also, like you're saying, I have to think about how I'm going to convince them that this is like good enough to do, that this is going to have value for them. Um, and so, yeah, it's unfortunate we have to go through all those hoops, and it is what it is, though, I guess.
They think in terms of money, and in SEO, I don't know if it's more than any other profession. There are a bunch of little things that you do that it's really, really difficult to equate money to. Like, hey, go fix that alt text. Or like you said, go fix that redirect chain. I can't exactly tell you how much money that particular action is going to get you, but when you string together all of these actions together in harmony, that's going to get you a lot of money in the end. So it's
one thing that helps me that I've used in the past is CEOs and business owners. They tend to be focused on things like rankings, and they'll focus on like this one ranking. If we can rank on the first page for this one ranking, we'll make this much money, and all of our competitors are ranking for this one ranking. And I mean, in a way, that can be annoying for an SEO, but it can also be kind of a way in because, like, you can hold that, in the back of your mind, and when they ask you, well, why do we need to fix these redirects? And I can just say, well, this is part of our method to get you to number one for that term. Like and also understand that you are one company competing for that term out of the entire world. I use that analogy a lot with clients. I'll say, like, look, you want to be the number one company out of the entire world to rank for that term. You don't get there by not doing everything that's involved, And so all of the stuff that I'm throwing at you to get done, it's so that you can be better than everyone else in the world. You need to be better than everyone else in the world to get to number one for that term. And like normally I don't really like focusing on like one or two terms, especially when it comes to like reporting. But if you can use that kind of mental hack with clients to say, like, look, if your objective is to be number one for this term, or if your objective is to be like, in the top three for this term, or if it's to get a featured snippet or whatever they're obsessed over, you can totally utilize that objective of theirs to like push them into doing everything else that's needed. Because the truth is that there is no like one ranking factor. There is no like magic like formula that we can kind of shoot for. Everything has to be done. Like everything needs to be done to uh, increase the likelihood and the probability that you're going to be successful, no matter what your objective is. So getting everything done is important, and that's the way you kind of communicate that to the client, is that this is what's required to get done, everything, you know. Um, so yeah, that's one way you can do it, you
Yeah.
know.
That's great. So, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome? It seems like you've um, have like we talk about it a lot on the podcast here, but it seems like you have a lot going for you. You know a lot about SEO. You started some companies. It seems like you're killing it everywhere. But do you ever sit back and just like sometimes feel like imposter syndrome pulling in?
So let me first start by saying thank you for saying that it seems like I'm killing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Because I'm not. I'm not at all. And yes, I do have imposter syndrome sometimes. And it's funny that it's funny because I tweeted about this a while back. I asked the SEOs, like, what are your ways to like get over imposter syndrome or whatever? And I've noticed that like a lot of people in our industry like to talk about imposter syndrome. Like it is something that they bring up a lot. And everyone has their own advice on how to like overcome imposter syndrome. And I got a ton of responses to that tweet. Um, and honestly, not very many of them. Many of the responses were very helpful.
Mm.
Just to be honest, like, and it's because the imposter syndrome is subjective to everybody, right? And so everybody has their own ways of dealing with it, and so therefore it's like uh it is, some of the stuff they said was accurate. But for me, here's what helps me with my imposter syndrome is, and I don't get it very often because I do have like a giant ego. But when I do get imposter syndrome, um, what helps me, and this is like part of my giant ego too. What helps me is like, and I shouldn't say this, 'cause it sounds like I'm an asshole, but I kind of am. Like if I like make a little private list in my head of all the people that are dumber than I am, okay, and the reason that I do this is because like
Wow.
I'm just being honest,
No, it's really funny. I like
like
it.
and I'm just being honest because like there are some folks that um like I'll give you a good example. I got chewed out one day by a client. Um, he was not happy with something that I was working on, and he had every right to be unhappy with it. And it was frustrating too because I was having a lot of trouble getting this part of the project done, and so I felt like shit afterwards. And I mean that feeling of like feeling like shit lasted for like a week, after that. Um, and I mean that same thing happens like even if you're working in house, like if you screw up something at work, that kind of thing. But what really like made me feel better was like reviewing. I don't know how to explain it. I can't remember what the exact example was, but I remember like starting to like see dumb things people were saying um online, and also like to be clear, these people that were saying these stupid things were people that I respect, like people that I really like and respect, and I'm like looking at them and I'm thinking, God, like they're people I respect, but they don't know how to write that HTML tag. Like what's going on here, and I know that sounds shitty like to think that way. And I don't say it publicly. I don't say her a list of stupid people. Like obviously, I
We,
keep it to
we get
myself,
a
and
lot of
I
responses.
and I keep it to myself, and I don't say it publicly. But I guess my point is this: is that if you're ever feeling like you're less than other people, if you ever feel like you're less than like who you thought you were, it's really helpful to realize that other people around you, that maybe your peers, that maybe people that you have a lot of respect for, that maybe people that you thought were so much more smarter than you, it's really helpful to witness their vulnerabilities as well, and to witness their flaws as well, right? And that doesn't
Yep.
mean that they're like really stupid. I shouldn't say that they're stupid, but it just means that I
Yeah.
might know more about something than they do. Um, and that little bit of like confidence boosting really helps. And it helps me kind of realize that, oh wait, like that, like I'm totally not as shitty as I thought I was, like because they didn't even know this. So I think that helps a lot. And I think also what kind of helps with imposter syndrome is understanding that um, your level of expertise and your level of uh, how good you are at any job is a fluid state. And that, like, I'm not like it, I feel like the longer I do SEO, the less I'm sure of things, right? You've seen that experience graph where it's like in the beginning, you start off, in a career path, and like 2 or 3 months in, you think you're an expert, and then like you peak, and then Google manually penalizes one of your clients for buying links, and then you drop back down to not knowing anything. Your confidence level goes back down, and so, and the longer you stay in SEO, the longer the more you realize that you may be unsure of a lot of things. And so I think that's true for a lot of SEOs. The longer they stay in it, the more unsure of things they are. Um, and but at the same time, but it's so damning too, because at the same time, the more unsure you are, the more blinded you are to your own expertise. So you're more likely to have imposter syndrome the longer you stay in this industry, because you're not even aware of how smart you are. um and when you're a solo entrepreneur like I am, that can be so um from a business standpoint, that can be really bad, because like I'm basing my pricing off of how I feel about myself you know
Yeah.
and that's not a good thing. Like that's when my ego should kick in and be like, you can charge as much as you want. But I don't, because I feel like, well, I don't know. And so I think it's a really kind of an interesting topic, and I think that it's something that we should all talk about more, because I feel like the more we all talk about imposter syndrome, the more we can realize, oh well, like, maybe I need to have a different perspective of this. Maybe I need to really focus on like what's actually happening, and have a more self-aware of where I'm at in this industry, and where I'm going.
Yeah.
Um,
I like to surround myself around the smartest people, so I don't ever feel like an imposter because I just know that they're better, and
oh,
then I learn from them.
so are you saying that like you like to surround yourself with smarter people so that you know that you're
Oh,
not
I
as
mean it
smart as they are, and then you know that you're not an imposter because
exactly.
you're authentically stupid?
I'm authentically the guy, the dumb guy on your list.
Okay, well that's cool. I mean, in a way, that's cool, I guess.
No, it is. I like to like I don't know. I kind of get into discussions where like I love to learn, and I want to pick people's brains and understand that. And part of this podcast is to interview like some of these really brilliant people such as yourself to be able to learn from. And um yeah, well, we all get into our, like, I've been doing this probably same length as you, and I know there's a lot of people that I I'm higher up on the chain on, and I know where I think I know where I am on the chain.
Hmm.
So it's knowing that, like, yeah, I'm not on the dumb list, but at the same time I'm I don't go out there saying that I'm like the best either, right? So I think where I kind of have that balanced ego where I'm in there like, oh, hey, I know I can know more. When I see, like, or talk to Paul Shapiro, that dude's just like a brainiac, or Patrick Stocks has like a memory of every article ever written, I think. So like he'll like mention something and I'm like, I'm not sure. And he's like, oh, this came out in 2017. It was this, and this. And I'm like, oh, great. It's like, it's really great to, surround yourself around some of these people, and not maybe physically online is good too.
Yeah.
And I, I think I'd never come out saying I'm the best. And I think that's why I don't ever feel like an imposter, because I always feel like I'm learning. But no, it is like a different take on it, but I do like agree with your end of it too. It's like you have to know, and I think making that list is like knowing where you're at, and knowing that like, hey, like I'm not the most brilliant mind out there. I'm not working for Google. I think people in Google have it hard because everybody wants the answers and they're not going to give you the answers, like the real answers. And the other
Yeah,
end of that is, and then when you don't, then they hate on you. So it's
yeah,
but like, I mean, those guys are ultra smart, right? And it's like, I look at them and like, well, I'll never probably know as much as Martin Split.
yeah.
And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
One of the problems I think with our industry though is there seems to be this like overemphasis on like the smart person, or that smart kind of archetype of a person. Like, and I mean, there was this really great article I read, it was in Search Engine Journal, about the I don't know what they called it. It was like the amateur uh, academic, or the pseudoscience kind of academic approach to SEO, and the how like the studies that have been done essentially, um, and I feel like that was a really great piece. I wish I knew the name of it, but anyways, that was a really great piece. And it was really touched on something that I think happens a lot within SEO, is that we try to, a part of the marketing of SEO services and SEO consultancy is to be like the smartest person, and like, oh yeah, I have this new approach using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and this and that and the third, and
Yep.
serverless hosting systems, and it's like, okay, but that's not really what 98% of the clients need or use. And even so, like, I don't know, it just seems like that approach for me. I went into that when I first started into the SEO consulting. I kind of started that kind of approach where I was like, yes, I'm going to market myself as like the brainiac, the smartest guy, and then that's how I'll get clients. And I think that works. Like we talked about in the beginning, like about the sort of like that kind of behavior that is unappealing in some regard does work.
Yep.
Like I think that does work for a lot of consultants, and a lot of tool providers. But at the end of the day, it's also kind of shallow too, because the client then partners with someone and realizes, well, wait a second, like this person that you know presents themselves as this, that, is recommending that we just buy links, and that's like, to me, my whole thing has always been like, okay, like you get what I tell you you're gonna get. Like my marketing and my sales process is all designed around what I'm gonna deliver you. And so after the project is completed, they may not be like super thrilled about me telling them that they need to build a whole new website or whatever, but they're going to be happy that I delivered exactly what I promised, because I didn't over promise anything. I didn't tell them that they're going to get this, and then not deliver it. And I think that's important for
Yep.
me.
Yeah, I would say my opinion on imposter syndrome has changed throughout my career. I've told this story many times, how I happened to run up against somebody who was pretty well respected in the industry and a very big name. And this happened a couple of times where when it came to actually working with them and making a client recommendation and leaning on them for validation, and only to look at them and see kind of a deer in the headlights, I've got no idea what you're talking about, look
Yeah,
coming from them to me. It really for me was a major letdown in that I had looked up to those people, but it was also like a major realization that, one, I'm not as dumb as I think I am, and two, that no matter what your name and reputation are in this industry, there are certainly times where people they're just better, right? They have more talent, they have more experience, whatever. But there are times where people that you think are better than you are not, and people that you think are not better than you, they might be. And in a lot of cases, they're feeling also what you're feeling. They're feeling imposter syndrome as well, and you just don't know it, or they don't show it. But there are a lot of people that often feel that way, both big and small, in this industry. And I think for me, I still feel it. I feel it not as much as I used to. But then again, I used to care more about trying to build up my personal brand in the industry more so than I care about it now. And I'm more kind of comfortable in my skin with my experience and my knowledge now than I was, I think, years ago. And for me, that part has being comfortable in my own skin has definitely helped quite a bit.
That's awesome. And the truth is that there are a lot of people in the SEO industry and SEO community that are a hell of a lot better at personal branding than they are at SEO. And you would never know that, but it's the truth. And I always think about Dave Snyder. If you guys know Dave Snyder from Copy Press, I met him at one of my first SEO conferences, and he was speaking. And I don't know if he would be upset with me mentioning what he said during his talk, but he said to me, or he said to the group, he said uh, that I'm in this to make money. Otherwise, I would be at home eating cookies. Um, and for me, like that's the whole reason that I've been interested in personal branding. Um, and that's the whole reason I'm interested in anything like regarding the SEO community nowadays. But part of that also means that like I have to deliver on that. I have to deliver when I'm selling or offering. Um, and so that's the only reason I'm into the personal branding now. Like it's just to promote the business and promote the work that I do to make more money. Um, I think that a lot of SEOs kind of get into this, and the personal branding route is less about like promoting a business and more about just promoting themselves, and that maybe by having a strong personal brand, then the business will come next, or business will come
Yep.
later, or more opportunities will come later. And I think that's probably true for some folks. But I tell you, after working for a couple of agencies and knowing a lot of um, folks that can't back up their personal brand in SEO tend to get a reputation on the back end, and it's I don't know, it is what it is, but it is what it is, I guess. I like to really make sure that my reputation um, is kind of one from like that measures both ends, that the personal brand matches like the work that I do. And I do that, I think partly I'll do that by freely admitting like things I don't know. Like there are plenty of things I don't know. And there are plenty of things in SEO I don't know, you know, and I'll freely admit that publicly because I don't want there to be any misconception over what I'm doing and what I'm representing.
Yep.
Definitely.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Joe, you've said one of my favorite sayings now quite a bit. It is what it is. My wife hates it, but it is one of my best sayings. I repeat it over and over and over again, and somehow it makes me feel better when I say it. Um, so I want to move on. I want to close out the episode. So we are doing kind of a new thing this season where we poll Twitter for questions that they would like to ask the guest. And this time around, we got 3 questions. And the winner, who we will decide, maybe Jeff or Joe, or I don't want to decide. I'm not good at making decisions. But
Let the guests decide.
the winner is going to get a free Page Two Podcast sticker. So, question number 1 from Jess, but 666 feet away at Jess the BP. Not sure what all that means, but she asked, "What is the funniest problem that you've seen on Twitter, Joe?"
Okay,
Not
so
on, I'm sorry, not on Twitter, on a website.
okay, yeah. So this is from Jessica Peck. Jessica is actually a former coworker of mine. We both worked at Proficient together. And she is super cool and super, super smart. So if you have the chance, you guys should all go and follow her. Um, she's one of these people who does technical SEO, but she is also technically savvy, as you know, she can write all of her own code and develop products. So she's amazing. But one of the funniest things that I've seen on the website, and I think I've mentioned this on Twitter before. So I had this situation where a friend of mine introduced me to somebody. Um, my friend was looking for some SEO help, and so I was helping her out with that. And then she introduced me to this other guy, and he was like, "Oh, you do SEO?" And he was like, "I've heard of that. I've been, trying to optimize my site. Would you mind just taking a look at it?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "I have this problem where, um, when you search for my brand name, like I'm there as the first result, but like the heading in the search snippet is not like, it's just a weird heading." And I looked at the SERP, and it was like the site was there number 1 for his brand name, and he had site links, but the title of the search snippet was just really weird looking. And I asked him, I was like, "Oh, well, this is weird." And so I went, looked at the homepage and looked at the source code, and what he had done was the title tag of his page was just like a long list of like keywords, like in a comma separated values um, list, like one comma after another keyword. And I was like, what's going on here, man? Like, why is your title tag like that? And he was like, "Well, I heard that, if you put the keywords in the title tag, then you'll rank for those keywords." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So that was probably the funniest thing. And I had to
That's
explain
funny.
to him, like, I was like, "Well, you have to actually write like actual sentences in the title tag. And then for each one of these keywords, you should probably create like a separate piece of content and utilize that keyword in the title tag. And the title tag would include like the title of the page, not just the keywords, listed." And I said, so that's why when you look at Google, like that's why it looks so weird, because that's what it's showing. So that was probably the funniest thing. Um, and it was stuff like that, like where you encounter people like that throughout your career. Most people that spend money on SEO aren't making mistakes like that. So I don't get that kind of stuff with clients, but occasionally I get that kind of stuff with folks that have like a real small business website or something. Um, and it's things like that where it's like you have to really like practice not just laughing, or being kind of an asshole
Yeah.
to them, because they don't know, and so you just kind of have to
Yep.
help them out as much as possible and move on.
So question number 2 comes from Wade Saunders, who is actually my colleague, Jeff's former colleague at Heels Four Corners on Twitter.
Oh, cool.
Joe, what are your favorite SEO reports for enterprise projects? Do you use Google Search Console data for monthly reports? And he says he'll hang up and listen. Not a call-in show, but you can do whatever you want, Wade.
Okay. So I'll be honest, I don't do a ton of monthly reporting because most of my projects are project-based. And so I don't do a whole lot of retainer work. I do have one client right now on retainer, and I do some monthly reporting for that client. But yeah, I use Search Console. I use SEMrush. It's really just based on what the client needs and what we're trying to look at. I've used Google Data Studio in the past. That's pretty good. I don't really love that. I think it's a little overrated. But there are some things out there that are helpful. I really go for like a subjective approach though with reporting. I've experimented a little bit with my own custom reporting dashboard. And it does tie into a Search Console. But what I found with that is that, like I said, for some clients, that just Search Console data isn't enough, and you need more. So it really just depends on the client. I'm a big fan of Google Sheets as well. And there's a lot of add-ons for Google Sheets that can make it super easy to pull data in. And so I love doing that kind of thing. It just depends on the client, really. And with enterprise, especially with enterprise, when you're working with someone in-house that likely is just as smart as you are, or maybe has all the skills to be as smart as you are, you can really do things with them that is a very custom approach to reporting, and develop a solution for reporting for them that's going to work best for their needs, because they have to report that data up the chain. And so putting it in a format that makes their life easier is the best, kind of route to go.
So question number 3 comes from Page 2 Podcast alum, JP Sherman at JP Sherman. When you find, and this is a funny one, when you find something that doesn't feel right in SEO, do you have a process to discover it, or do you start smashing things? And if you smash things, what is the smashiest smashy order?
So JP is a super cool guy. JP is one of these guys who is probably underrated. And he is super brilliant, and does stuff that most of us would not be able to do. I remember one time at PubCon, he just offhandedly mentioned to me, "Oh yeah, I'm building my own knowledge graph." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, wow, that's incredible. He's a cool dude. So about his, smashing things, I don't really know exactly what he means by that. But the name of my business is All Analysis, and that's what I do most of is analysis. So usually when things don't look right, I do spend more time doing analysis and trying to figure out why they don't look right, what the problem is, and go forward. I am super, super, super careful with my clients. I mean, like to the point where I will even recommend, I'll say, look, I'm going to give you 4 or 5 hours of free time so I can figure this out for you before I make a recommendation. Like I do risk analysis all the time. I do stuff that I think a lot of SEOs would think is kind of overkill. But I've seen the bloodshed before, and I've seen how things can go bad, and I don't want to repeat that. And maybe sometimes I'm a little bit more, maybe a little too excessive or too cautious with things that I do. But I definitely would rather do more analysis than smashing things. And when I do smash things, I do it in like a methodical order. Like I know, like, okay, when we smash this, here's the least riskiest way to smash this, and I go through it and do it in a way that like we can watch, oh God, maybe I should have smashed that. Like, let's reverse that quickly. So I kind of go through a process that makes sense. It just all depends on the client and the project, what we're doing. A lot of that kind of stuff happens with things like migrations, or uh, changing things like, you know, cross domain canonical tags, that kind of stuff that are kind of out of the box, and could incur some risk. So we kind of go through the process and do tons and tons of analysis before we execute anything, you know.
So JP did not specify which things were being smashed, and
Yeah.
most people would think inanimate objects, but from my experience, usually it's my head against the wall when things don't feel right.
JP is probably talking more about like server architecture, or
Yeah.
or like, the back end, like internal search mechanisms or something that, are above all of our pay grades. So,
Yep.
you know,
Of course he is.
yeah. So yeah.
So let's pick a winner. Jeff or Joe, which one of those questions do you think warrants a Page Two podcast sticker?
I'm gonna go JP.
All right,
Yeah, let's go
JP,
JP. That's good.
you are the winner of a sticker, and we will be reaching out to you to send it your way. So, Jeff, do you want to close us out?
Sure. So, Joe, we like to ask all our guests one final question, and that is, if you were starting in SEO, or what is your best piece of advice to give someone who is just starting out in SEO today?
Oh, it has to be just one piece of advice?
Well, we can make it a sum of advices.
So here's what I think you should do. Understand why you're here. Like, what's your objective doing SEO? And understand why you're here. And I think that's the biggest reason. And then also understand, like, after you figure out why you're here, understand, if you're here to, if this is going to be a career, and if you're here to make this a career, um, then understand that your value in this industry is what's on paper, or I guess maybe not what's on paper, but your value in this industry is basically what you can offer and deliver to your clients and to your colleagues and the companies that you work for, and that it's not necessarily based on a lot of the shiny stuff that we see on social media, and elsewhere. One of my business principles has always been the product has to be better than the marketing, right? And that's true for people too. You have to be uh, a good SEO. You have to be a good person to succeed in this industry, um, and that has to be better than the marketing. You should definitely do marketing for yourself, and you should definitely get out there and promote yourself if you want a career in the industry. But really understand that the proof is in the pudding. Um, and for me, like we talked about personal branding a lot today, I'll be the first to admit I've screwed up my personal brand plenty of times by saying or doing things that I probably shouldn't have said or done. Uh, but one thing that has kept me in this game, despite that, is the fact that when I get hired by someone, I just do whatever it takes to deliver. And that turns into referrals, that turns into good testimonies, that turns into other opportunities opening up for me. But also, like I mentioned, like you really need to know why you're in this industry, because if you're getting into SEO just to promote your own work or just promote your own websites, or maybe you don't even want a career, maybe it's just a hobby, um, know that, because the first time I went to PubCon, I remember meeting this guy at PubCon, and I couldn't believe this guy. He was like, I really don't know like what I'm here for. Like, is this a job or a hobby? He said that, and I was actually kind of pissed off at him. Like, when I heard that in my head, because for me, like, I had saved up a bunch of money to go to PubCon. I had like I felt like I had busted my ass, like dragged like a 200-pound electric wheelchair across the country uh, to Las Vegas, and this dude is not sure why he's here, like, but at the same time, like, I now look back on that and I think, well, you know what? Like, he was there for the hobby, and he was there for the camaraderie and the friendships, and there's nothing wrong with any of that.
Yeah.
But if you're in it for just a hobby, um, then know that. And if you're in it for a professional business, then be like my friend Dave, and who, you know, does all this to make money. Otherwise he'd be at home eating cookies, um, and be all in it.
Yep.
So know why you're here, and take advantage of all that you can to reach that objective. And then also, I think another thing too for me, I hate to, if you don't mind me just plugging one thing here.
Yep.
I have a blog post on my blog. It's very old. It's called How I Became a Postmodern SEO. And it's really just all about how all of us approach this industry differently, and about how we all have different ideas and different things that work well for SEO. And there is no real one size fits all for SEO. And so if you can keep that perspective going forward, and it's something that I have to always remind myself too, is that we're all in this in a different way, and that knowing that there's different ways to be successful in SEO is important, and to know that like your way may be different than someone else's, but they may that's fine. It doesn't really matter. My only issue with SEOs is the only time nowadays I get really angry with SEOs. And I mean real angry. I don't mean like the stuff I say on Twitter. That's just not really anything. That's just me venting. But like when I really am upset with an SEO is when they're not being ethically sound with their clients or customers, and they're ripping people off. I can't stand that. But as far as like a difference in perspective of as far as tactics or strategy, like that's just everybody's different. And some people can succeed really well with things like buying links. I'm just going to be straight and honest with that. Like some people are really good at that, and some people know how to um, mitigate the risk in doing that well enough to get their clients very successful. And some people aren't. And you need to know that's another thing too, another bit of advice. Know why you're here and know what you're good at, and really focus on both of those things. Um, and just go forward from there. Um, but I think that's where, those are my thoughts, I think.
Cool. That's
So-
great.
So Joe, where can and speaking of plugs, where
Okay.
can people find you?
So, speaking of plugs, let me show you my collection. You can reach me at on Twitter. Twitter is like my only social media that I use for this industry. A lot of people connect with me on Facebook, but just be warned that I hate that. So on Twitter, you can find me at Joe Hall. My SEO consulting website is hallanalysis.com. And then my new venture is cloud22.com, which is a WordPress hosting site. That's about it though. Yeah.
So we're going to do a quick plug before we let Joe go. So if you didn't watch the first video, we are now taking ourselves to be a little bit more serious on YouTube. So we're going to do the thing that my kids do when they watch the YouTube videos. Make sure you subscribe,
Smash like.
hit that little bell, smash it,
Hit that bell.
so you can be notified whenever we post a new video. And oh, by the way, I haven't mentioned it. We've got Page Two Podcast swag, which
Wow.
is available on our website. So we're kind of running a serious operation now. It only took 50 episodes for us to get serious about things. So if you want a little bit of swag, go to our website, which is page2podcast.fm.
Mine's coming in the mail. Can't wait.
Cool.
I
So
bought a hoodie too.
you got a hoodie? Yeah, I've been wearing my hoodie all week.
Nice.
Very, very warm. I'll be honest. So it comes from Teespring. You're going to want to wash it once. It smelled a little funny at first, which is I guess, the new custom shirt smell. Wash it, please, before you wear it. But yeah, so we'll be designing more merch in different. We've got our logo in different colors. So yeah, look for that. And JP, look for your sticker. Joe, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for having a very, very long and in-depth conversation. And thank you for being the first guest of the season. We really appreciated talking to you.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's been a really great conversation, and I am very impressed with your whole setup here. And I'm looking forward to tuning in more on the podcast, and I really appreciate letting me be here. This has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good one, everybody.